Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria has carried out the introduction in blue colouring of its draft resolution at the UN Security Council recommending that the General Assembly admits the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations. On the occasion of the Palestinian Prisoners' Day, the Arab Parliament called on the international community, the United Nations, to take the serious international actions to put pressure on the Israeli occupation and urge it to immediately release innocent prisoners. Special Representative for Libya and head of the UN mission in Libya, Abdullah Batili, has resigned, saying that the UN has no chance to operate successfully. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. Algeria has carried out the introduction and blue colouring of its draft resolution at the UN Security Council recommending that the General Assembly admit the State of Palestine as a member of the United Nations. This stage being the last before the draft resolution is voted by the members of the Security Council. Strongly supported by the Arab group in New York, this step follows the tireless efforts of the Algerian diplomacy in accordance with the instructions of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, to mobilize the greatest possible support to enable the State of Palestine to obtain full membership of the UN. The voting session on the draft resolution has been scheduled for the afternoon on Thursday, April 18th at 3 p.m. New York time, 8 p.m. Algiers time. The Arab Parliament has called for forming an investigative committee to visit Israeli prisons in order to identify the serious and inhumane violations committed against the Palestinian prisoners. More in this report by Majid Mila.
On the occasion of the Palestinian Prisoners' Day, the Arab Parliament called on the international community, the United Nations, as well as regional and international human rights institutions and the International Committee of the Red Cross to take serious international actions to put pressure on the Israeli occupation and urge it to immediately release innocent prisoners. The Arab Parliament also called for ensuring the respect of international law and providing the necessary protection to Palestinians in accordance with the Fourth Geneva Convention. He said that this year's Prisoners' Day coincides with the dangerous escalation pursued by the Israeli occupying forces against Gaza, the war of genocide and ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people, and the escalation of the far-right government against the Palestinian prisoners in the occupied West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
The Palestinian Detainees and Ex-Detainees Affairs Commission has said that 78 Palestinian women prisoners risk death every day in the Israeli occupation Damon prison. The Commission stressed in a communiqué published on the occasion of the Palestinian Prisoners' Day, marked every year on April 18th, that among the women detained, 60 are from the West Bank, 3 from the wholly occupied city of Jerusalem, 9 from the 1948 territories, and 6 from the Gaza Strip, noting that 21 of these women are being held in administrative detention without trial or charge. The Israeli occupation forces have been making indiscriminate arrests of Palestinians, particularly in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, inflicting inhumane, cruel and degrading treatment and abuse. The Israeli occupation army has turned the prisons and detention centers into death traps, where it inflicts all forms of torture and inhumane and cruel treatment, including physical liquidation, and then conceals its crime by refusing to hand over the bodies to their families. More details with Said Bouhazi.
Since the beginning of Operation Flood of Al-Aqsa, the Zionist entity has taken a series of measures and promulgated arbitrary laws aimed at preventing families, lawyers and the Red Crescent from visiting detainees and depriving them of all contact with the outside world. In a statement to APS, the president of the Palestinian Prisoners Club, Abdullah Az-Zaghari, said that since 7th October, the occupiers have turned the prisons into places devoid of any humanity. Blinded by hatred and vengeance, the Zionist jailers brutalize and torture the detainees and inflict on them cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, causing wounds, fractures and bruises which are left untreated, he added. The prisons have become death traps where the jailers satisfy their desire for revenge by abusing prisoners and inflicting all forms of torture and inhuman and cruel treatment prohibited by international law, he said. He added that 14 prisoners have died as martyrs in detention centers as a result of beatings and medical crimes committed in prisons over the last 6 months, the latest being Walid Diqa, who was recently martyred after being denied medical care in prison, where he was locked up for 37 years, bringing to 251 the number of prisoners who have fallen as martyrs in Zionist jails since the beginning of the occupation. The occupation is still holding the remains of 20 martyrs who died in prison and whom it refuses to hand over to their families, he denounced. Abdullah Zaghari also revealed that the Zionist occupation had arrested more than 8,200 Palestinians in the West Bank since the beginning of the barbaric aggression against the Gaza Strip, adding that these detainees arrested in their homes after midnight or at military checkpoints were tortured and brutalized, underlining that no category of the Palestinian society has been spared. Doctors, journalists, politicians, and even released former prisoners have all been targeted. The president of the Palestinian Prisoners Club said that the occupation's prisons currently hold nearly 9,400 Palestinian detainees, including 500 children and 272 women.
The leaders of Slovenia and Spain have agreed on the need to formally recognize the state of Palestine as a means of ending the Israeli aggression against Gaza. In a joint press conference with his Spanish counterparts, Slovenian Prime Minister Roberto Golob said with Pedro Sanchez that the most important thing is that they have addressed a whole series of questions on when to recognize Palestine. Golob gave no timetable, affirming that Slovenia would vote in the United Nations Security Council for the state of Palestine to become a fully fledged member of the United Nations. Let's recall that Spain agreed last month with the Irish, Slovenian and Maltese leaders to take the first steps towards recognizing the state of Palestine. The Norwegian Council for Refugees and Save the Children have stated from October 7th nearly 90% of schools have been devastated in Gaza, subjected to the Israeli genocidal war. According to the NGO, the university building is still standing and all Gaza schools have been closed for 6 months for 625,000 students. According to the letter, based on the data from the Palestinian Ministry of Education, on April 2nd, more than 5,479 students and 261 teachers have been killed in Gaza Strip since October 7th. The international community must strongly condemn all attacks on schools and demand respect for international humanitarian law. The Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Observatory has said that the Zionist entity was continuing its crimes and forced displacement against Palestinians, preventing them from returning to the north of the war-torn Gaza Strip. Said Bourazi has more.
In a statement published on its website, the non-governmental organization reports that the Zionist army attacked thousands of Palestinian civilians last Sunday, killing and injuring dozens of them, and continuing its crime of forced displacement by preventing civilians it had previously forced to evacuate from returning to the northern regions. These actions can be considered crimes against humanity and war crimes. The non-governmental organization points out that since 12 October 2023, 5 days after the start of the ongoing genocide against the population of the Gaza Strip, the Zionist army has attempted to carry out its largest campaign of forced displacement against approximately 1.1 million inhabitants of the northern Gaza Strip by forcing them to evacuate to the south and center of the besieged enclave. The Zionist entity must put an end to its crime of forced displacement against Palestinian civilians and allow them to return to their homes in accordance with international law, stresses the observatory, adding that the international community must put pressure on the Zionist entity to put an end to all these crimes and respect the rules of war, which prohibit the deliberate targeting of civilians in all circumstances and considers the displacement of civilians a serious violation amounting to crimes against humanity and war crimes.
And now in New York, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has received a special representative for Libya and head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, Abdoulaye Batili, at Algerian mission to the UN headquarters following his latest report on the situation in Libya presented to the Security Council and the announcement of his resignation from his post. During the meeting, Mr. Attaf hailed the efforts initiated by Mr. Batili during his mandate to contribute to the reconciliation of views between the Libyan parties and to enable the Libyan brotherly country to turn the page on differences and crisis once and for all. The two parties exchanged views on the latest developments on the Libyan stage. The meeting is part of a working visit on the agenda of the Foreign Affairs Minister abroad in New York to participate to a series of ministerial meetings on the Palestinian question instructed by the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. And now the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has expressed his gratitude to his special representative for Libya and head of the United Nations mission in Libya, Abdoulaye Batili, after the latter has announced his resignation. Mr. Batili told the Security Council on Tuesday that he had submitted his resignation to the UN Secretary General, which was later confirmed by Mr. Guterres' press service, saying that he had accepted Mr. Batili's resignation. Speaking to the newsmen about the situation in Libya, Mr. Batili said there is no chance that the United Nations can operate successfully.
Libya is more and more on the road almost to lose its sovereignty. The UN has made all the efforts. UNSMIL has attempted to avert this situation. We needed the support of all the international and regional players to achieve meaningful results. Unfortunately, we have seen, against the backdrop of this developing crisis, parallel tracks taken by different foreign actors which undermine the effort of the UN. So long as this exists, there is no room for a solution in the future.
Mr. Batili told the UN Security Council meeting that his efforts were met with resistance, resulting in delaying the holding of elections in the country.
Since I invited the 5 key Libyan stakeholders for a dialogue to resolve all contested issues pertaining to the electoral laws and the formation of a unified government, I have escalated my engagement with them and proposed ways to address their concerns while maintaining the integrity of the dialogue initiative I originally proposed. Unfortunately, my attempts to address their concerns were met with stubborn resistance, unreasonable expectations, and indifference to the interests of the Libyan people. Since the end of 2022, the United Nations led efforts to help resolve Libya's political crisis through elections faced national as well as regional pushbacks, revealing an intentional defiance to engage in earnest and a tenacity to perpetually delay elections.
He also stressed in his speech at the meeting that a political settlement based on the negotiation and compromise is required to reach a solution to the ongoing crisis in Libya.
Preconditions put forward by Libyan leaders contradict their proclaimed intention to find a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned solution to the conflict. So far, they have not demonstrated their goodwill. Concerns regarding the weakening of the international consensus on Libya are growing within the general population, as their country has become the playground for fierce rivalry among regional and international actors motivated by geopolitical, political, and economic interests, as well as competition, extending beyond Libya and related to its neighborhood. Libyan leaders must reach a political settlement based on negotiations and compromise. We cannot allow the aspirations of 2.8 million of registered Libyan voters to be overshadowed by the narrow interests of a few.
That was the UN envoy, was appointed the head of the UN mission in Libya in September 2022. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks at the headquarters of the Algerian missions at the United Nations with the personal envoy of the Secretary General to Western Sahara, Mr. Stefan de Mistura, as part of his working visit he is making to New York. The talks focused on the UN steps and efforts aimed at relaunching the political process with the participation of the two parties to the conflict, the Polisario Front and Morocco, with a view to achieving a political solution which guarantees the rights of the Sahrawi people to self-determination. The personal envoy is expected to present a report to the Security Council on developments relating to this issue during the meeting scheduled at the Council on the question of Western Sahara. Ahmed Attaf has also received the American Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for North Africa and Near Eastern Affairs, Joshua Harris, who is the American official in charge of monitoring the Western Sahara issue. And now the Communication Minister, Mohamed Lahgab, has extended his condolences following the death of the 77-year-old sport journalist Mohamed Merzougui. The Minister of Energy and Mines, Mohamed Arkab, has said in Algiers that his sector is working to develop a national energy model capable of outlining a forward-looking vision of energy, security and transition. That's it for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to our weekly program by my colleague Asya Bakar.
Our Talk. A weekly program with